inviting us for this very, very important and relevant topic, which is of concern for all of us today. And in fact, congratulations to the organizers for organizing this program, this webinar on a very, very relevant topic. Uh, Everybody has spoken about the impact, and the impact is not limited to a particular geography or a particular country or a particular sector. It's going to impact all of us. And organizing this seminar, this webinar at a time when the recognition of climate change as a significant financial risk for banks is growing on global scale. And the presence of ambiguity regarding the timing and magnitude of climate-related and environmental risk poses a significant danger to the stability, integrity, and resilience of individual financial institutions, thereby affecting the overall stability of the financial system. Here, it will be important to know the regulator's perspective also firsthand. What is the regulator in India, the central bank, Reserve Bank of India, is looking at this entire climate transition and the climate risk perspective in the financial institutions. So it's important to know the central bank's perspective. So the central bank's initiative that the Reserve Bank of India in India has taken is given the growing importance of climate-related financial risk, RBI has recently placed a draft disclosure framework on climate-related financial risk 2024 with an aim to provide a better, consistent, and comparable disclosure framework for the regulated entities in India. Though through this guideline, RBI proposes to make a mandatory for all the regulated entities to disclosures be made on 4 parameters. One is governance, second is strategy, third is risk management and matrices, and the targets. The framework also defines the transition risk, and it says that the transition risk is the risk related to the process of adjustment towards a low carbon economy, with changes in climate-related policies and regulations, emergence of new technologies, and shift in the customer's preference and behavior. So coming to the transition risk, all of you know that India has a commitment to a net zero, and India's commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2070. And what are the implications and what are the transition risks in the financial sector? So these includes, from Indians' perspective, I would say, and it applies to the entire globe, financial institutions may need to recalibrate their operations and business strategies to support the green transition. This could involve additional cost and require new expertise, particularly in assessing and managing the climate-related risks. It also may lead to low carbon economy, to a significant repricing of assets. Oil fuel-based assets may become stranded, and sectors heavily reliant on carbon-intensive process may face devaluation. This could result in higher credit risk to the banks and the financial institutions to the sector where they are exposed. Transition risks also arise from policy changes aimed at reducing emissions, such as carbon pricing or subsidies for renewable energies. Changes in the market dynamics and the consumer behavior in response to the climate change can also affect the demand patterns, potentially impacting the financial performance of the businesses. The financial system may also face challenges in mobilizing adequate resources for green financing, which is estimated to be around 2.5% of India's GDP. Additionally, there may be a need for reallocation of current resources to contribute effectively to the country's net zero target. So addressing these transitions requires a lot of proactive approach from the financial institutions, including integrating climate risk assessment into their decision-making processes. We at NABARD would like to highlight some of the areas of initiatives that NABARD has taken during the last few years. In fact, Namita mentioned about since 1982, we have been critically focused on the natural resource management and agri and rural development sector. So from NABARD side, the whole spectrum of NABARD's function and initiatives focus on the attainment of sustainable development. NABARD's initiative in the agriculture and natural resource and rural development sector have integral components of climate action, both mitigation and adaptation, for vulnerable sectors and the communities. At NABARD level, we have set up a dedicated climate change fund to support the awareness building on climate change issues among various stakeholders to promote and demonstrate innovative climate change adaptation and mitigation interventions and climate resilient practices. So this is a dedicated fund that we have created for the entire capacity building framework of our stakeholders. Secondly, by acknowledging the importance of knowledge and skill building in promoting climate action, NABARD has been supporting extensive capacity building programs aimed at empowering farmers and other stakeholders with the necessary tools and knowledge to combat climate change effectively. In fact, NABARD has set up a Center for Climate Change at one of its training institutions with exclusive focus on knowledge sharing, training, capacity building, and policy advocacy. So that is the initiative NABARD has taken. As an organization, we have also developed a green taxonomy for the systematic assessment and classification of our business and development portfolio in the specific context of green and sustainable financing. This implementation of a green taxonomy is pivotal to classifying projects and programs of NABARD in accordance with the international best practices, facilitating the identification, promotion, and prioritization of environmentally sustainable projects. NABARD predates the concept of ESG investment and has, from its establishment, maintained a primary focus on fostering sustainable development within India's rural sector. In fact, recently, we have raised 130 million via social bond, and we are planning to issue green bonds in future. The framework, the concepts are being finalized, and we are planning for a green bond issuance in the future. So these are some of the initiatives that NABARD as a DFI has taken, and our overall role and the importance that we see is how do we ensure capacity building and awareness among various stakeholders to meet out the risk that is emanating from the climate change perspective. So I'll conclude by saying that the risk associated with climate change's transition is manifold. They challenge the very core traditional banking, demanding a revolution of assets, credit policies, and also investment strategies. However, these risks also present an unprecedented opportunity to innovate and lead the charge towards a sustainable future. And addressing this risk is not without challenges. There will be issues related to data gaps. There are issues related to capacity building and also financial decision making. So the banks have to take a proactive role in these areas. NABARD is playing a crucial role in terms of capacity building and skill development in this area. And the journey towards a climate resilient future is complex and challenging, but it is also filled with opportunities for innovation, growth, and leadership. As a financial custodians of the future, let us all embrace this challenge with the seriousness it deserves. And if we come all together and combine our efforts, definitely that is achievable, and that is what we can do. So once again, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me, giving me this opportunity. I'm sure the expert panels, those who are here, who will be discussing in more detail about the topic. So I'm sure the outcome will be very fruitful, and it will pave a path for our future endeavors in this direction. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rawat. I think that was very insightful, and green transition indeed needs finance. I think one of the points that I picked up and it clicked very well is a green taxonomy is a good method to classify green assets and therefore seek finance, targeted finance. And I think NABARD has been doing great on that front. Thank you very much. Let me move on to Jonathan. Jonathan, may I invite you to share your perspectives and touch upon the current landscape aligned to the new standards, and how has the BFSI sector responded to it, and how is IFRS supporting this alignment? It's all very new, and I'm sure there's so much of excitement. So over to you, Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much, Namita, and it's a really wonderful opportunity and privilege, particularly to follow Mr. Rawat and to join all of you today. Although I'm based in London today, joining this webinar from London, I've actually been in Asia over the last 10 days or so, and in fact returned from Malaysia. I know there are several participants, or many participants, on the call from Malaysia today, and I had a very fruitful few days working with the Malaysian Accounting Standards Board, MASB, meeting with regulators, including the Securities Commission and Bursa Malaysia, and also meeting with over 200 preparers as we begin to articulate the journey that now needs to take place across the world in terms of adopting the International Sustainability Board's inaugural standards, IFRS S1 and S2, that I will say a little bit about during my short presentation. And there isn't time to do justice to all the work that is going on, both within the IFRS Foundation, but also in the broader system of corporate reporting. So I'd very much like to say that my presentation today, I hope, will be an introduction, and one where we can sustain a relationship in the future, rather than it being something where we never talk to each other again. So please do take my remarks in that spirit as the opening to a longer conversation and dialogue, and hopefully partnership with you. And really, it was Enrique at the beginning of the webinar, he spoke about the need for decisions and actions and the need for collaboration. And I hope that the initiation of the International Sustainability Standards Board under the remit of the IFRS Foundation, this journey beginning in only November of 2021, when it was announced that the ISSB will be formed, and then the inaugural standards being produced after a widespread consultation in June of just last year, we now have the opportunity to adopt what we hope will be a global baseline of sustainability-related disclosures for the capital markets to help investors make better decisions, better informed decisions. And that is the role that the ISSB and the IFRS Foundation is playing. And you're going to hear me talk in my 7 minutes or so a lot about the ecosystem, because I think we've moved from a world, when I began working in corporate reporting and accounting many years ago, from a world where there was a lot of innovation, and that innovation transpired in the creation of lots of new initiatives, lots of new organizations, lots of frameworks and standards being developed. And that actually generated a lot of momentum around the voluntary disclosure of sustainability standards in the world. But it created, as Namita said, an alphabet soup. And one of the things that the ISSB has attempted to do in its short life so far is consolidate the standards and frameworks that are related to investors and the capital markets. Firstly, to reduce the letters in the alphabet soup, to simplify the corporate reporting landscape, and give preparers and users of information a running start in actually understanding the global corporate reporting system and being able to use our standards as that global baseline. But secondly, we recognize the need, as Mr. Florencio also said, for urgency. And there was no way that we could start from square one in 2022 in developing a new set of standards for the capital markets. We had to use a baseline. We had to use existing expertise, existing standards and frameworks in order to accelerate progress and ensure that we had available in 2023 the S1 and S2, the first standards of the ISSB that were produced. And so SASB standards, the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures recommendations, the Integrated Reporting Framework, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board framework, all of these materials have been used within our standards so that they are recognizable, and so that companies, financial institutions can use our standards from day one, because they will be recognizable and they will already be used in many markets and by many companies already. They are also being supported by financial institutions and financial regulators. And this is another critical part of the ISSB's work in ensuring that we accelerate the adoption of S1 and S2, which is now our priority for 2024 and beyond. We cannot do this alone. We're clear about our own responsibility and the governance of the IFRS Foundation, and we take our authority from our monitoring board, which is populated by IOSCO regulators. So the securities regulators around the world provide the IFRS Foundation with its legitimacy and with its purpose. We then have an IFRS Foundation Board of Trustees that oversee the governance of the IFRS Foundation. And now we have two independent standard-setting boards, the IASB that sets global accounting standards, and the ISSB, which is responsible for global sustainability-related financial disclosure standards for the capital markets. And the idea of developing a consistent global baseline to enable comparable information across markets is absolutely at the heart of what the ISSB is seeking to achieve. And the global response from regulators has been very clear in just a few months since the publication of IFRS S1 and S2. In exactly a month following the publication of the standards, IOSCO, the global securities regulators, endorsed those standards and asked their 130 plus members to consider how to include and adopt IFRS S1 within their own jurisdictional frameworks. Now, this is only the second time IOSCO has ever performed this role of endorsing global standards. The first time was around IFRS accounting standards. And so this was an historic milestone for the ISSB in order to push its legitimacy of those global standards so that we can genuinely create that global baseline of sustainability disclosure standards. At the same time, the Financial Stability Board, which, as you all know, created the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and the recommendations that came through, they said that the IFRS S1 and S2 represented a culmination of their work in this area. And they have handed the monitoring responsibilities of the adoption of TCFD to the ISSB in future, because we have in effect embedded those TCFD recommendations and those 4 pillars of TCFD within IFRS S1 and S2. And what is important, both for the ISSB standards and TCFD preceding it, is that it captures climate within traditional risk management processes. So we are not creating silos for disclosure, and we are not creating a mechanism for compliance and compliance alone. We are seeking to improve the governance of information. We want to connect this data and information on climate-related information and broader sustainability risks and opportunities to the boards of companies so that it can direct their decisions and improve the ability of boards to have engagement with their providers of financial capital. And so we have also developed a partnership program and a whole program for engaging in developing and emerging markets. And in many ways, our capacity building efforts since the launch of IFRS S1 and S2 have been most closely aligned to the needs and expectations of developing and emerging markets, working with financial regulators and financial institutions to build the architecture in emerging and developing economies that will enable the fast adoption of IFRS S1 and S2. Yes, to address key risks within those markets, but also to attract capital to enable the economies to grow and be sustained in the future. We have developed a partnership framework with over 35 institutional partners around the world that are producing training materials, education materials, relationship building, so that we can really build capacity in developing and emerging economies in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. And that capacity building program is just getting started. At COP28, we launched our Knowledge Hub. For example, on that Knowledge Hub, you have there our partnership with the Sustainable Stock Exchanges, producing training and educational materials. Our partnership with the global accounting body, the ACCA, producing educational materials on how to adopt GHG emissions consistent with our standards and with other standard setters around the world as well. And that capacity building effort is only getting started. And we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas for how we can improve that knowledge hub, which is publicly available. Are there any additional resources that would be valuable? And are there any organizations within your networks who would like to partner with the IFRS Foundation and with the ISSB? But we recognize, as I've said, that we are part of an ecosystem. We are very clear that our role is to provide the standards that will help the capital markets and to understand the value and the relevance of climate-related information and other sustainability-related information. But we recognize that you can go fast if you go alone, but you go far if you go together with other organizations. And so we recognize that just as we are developing a global baseline for the capital markets, there are other standards out there. The Global Reporting Initiative has got standards on the impact of a business on the environment and society. There are jurisdictional standards and frameworks, and we need to make sure that our global baseline is interoperable with those other well-used, mature standards on climate and other sustainability risks and opportunities. And so we have a jurisdictional working group that engages with regulators in Europe, in Asia, Africa, in the US, and we are really focused on ensuring that our global baseline really does fit and map to jurisdictional and other standards as well. And then finally, I was asked just to say a word or two about the long term. And I do genuinely believe that we are working towards now the possibility of having one global corporate reporting system, not standards and frameworks competing with each other, but a genuine partnership and collaboration between different actors within the corporate reporting landscape to develop that global system that is understandable and where information asymmetries can be addressed, risks in the system can be addressed, and that we have genuine disclosure that isn't about creating silos and compliance, but is actually about breaking down those silos and creating an understanding about how business allocates all of its resources in order to improve the sustainability and resilience of its business model going forward. And that ecosystem will include assurance standards. It will include higher quality data and the availability of data so that we can have not just qualitative information, but quantitative information as well. And we can address the regulatory concern around greenwashing as well, and that we have genuine information. But this is a journey. And the Basel Committee's consultation, which closes today, on the disclosure of climate-related financial risks, makes some really important points about the effects on the financial institutions and banks in particular. And what they are focused on is improving consistency, comparability, and reliability of climate disclosures. And what they say is that disclosure requirements are fundamental to healthy and sound banking system, and that provides market participants with meaningful information. And this must include key risk metrics, it must include reducing the information asymmetry, and it must promote the comparability of banks' risk profiles within and across jurisdictions. So the importance there of that global baseline being reflected in the Basel Committee's recommendations. And their preliminary proposal for bank-specific Pillar 3 disclosure requirements are explicitly in the Basel Committee's proposals aimed at complementing the ISSB standards. Now, there is recognition because, again, we come and we have to address the challenges in this system because we talk about the transition that we're asking companies to go on, but we are in a transition in terms of the information system and the disclosure requirements that we are asking companies to produce. And if we are going to have accurate, consistent, and high-quality disclosures in the future, then we have to understand that we are asking companies and the whole of our capital market system to go on something of a change management process, because we are not just broadening the range of information that we are asking companies and financial institutions in particular in the context of this webinar to disclose. But we are also asking those institutions to be reporting on forward-looking disclosures. We're asking companies to extend their disclosure horizon to address what Mark Carney, who was then the chairman of the Financial Stability Board when the TCFD was formed, called the tragedy of the horizon. The fact that we are all aware, we've all referred on this webinar so far to the known future risks associated with climate. Yet you look at the disclosures of most companies in the world, and they're trapped in a disclosure horizon that is so short-term, so myopic. Even though we are aware, even though boards are aware of those future known risks, we are trapped in this short-termism when it comes to disclosure. And what the ISSB standards are doing, what other standards and frameworks are seeking to do, is extend that disclosure horizon. Because when we think about transition risks, it isn't enough to be thinking about history. We have to be thinking about forward-looking information. And there the challenges are the data availability and quality in order to provide quantitative information, consistency of the information, and making sure that those forward-looking disclosures are available and encouraged so that we understand the implications of future known risks. There are other issues around skills and assurance to provide trust and confidence in the information. But these are not barriers to progress. They are hurdles that we must overcome. And that is because, again recognized already on this webinar, we are in a race against time. And that is also why we must engage all the participants in the ecosystem to make progress in time. And our contribution to that effort in our standards is that we have included the principle of proportionality. We have said, yes, companies should disclose their current and anticipated financial effects of climate-related risk and opportunity, but they can use qualitative information as well as quantitative information, where quantitative information could only be gathered at undue cost or effort. So we are trying to treat these challenges as hurdles rather than barriers that can never be overcome. And in this way, our standards complement the Basel Committee's analysis and proposals. And the final point that I would make before closing is another point that Mark Carney made just a few years ago, when he said that the journey that we are on isn't a sprint, it is a marathon. We have to get on that journey because the train in many ways has left the station, but we are in a marathon race, not a sprint. And I come back to the point again earlier about the ecosystem and about the need that we have to travel far. And in order to do that, we all have to play our part in order to achieve our common goal. I hope I've helped to explain in this short time the role I hope the ISSB standards will play in this broader ecosystem, and that we are working with so many actors in the system, from regulators to companies to investors, the accounting profession, and other standard setters in this system, in order to create that genuinely global corporate reporting system that will be simplified our corporate reporting disclosures and help them to be of real value to businesses and preparers and to our capital markets as a whole. With that, I'll hand back. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think it was not only a very explanation of a very consolidated approach. You demystified a lot there, but also put out the vision in terms of the long term. And that's what really, caught my attention, because ultimately it's not, reporting is a scorecard to analyze the current state at where financial institutions or companies are and where they need to transition. And within that, where sits the risks and opportunities. But, overall, the financial stability and the economic growth that one is talking about through this kind of an integrated approach, I think that's very important. And the qualitative and the quantitative data that it will it will filter out. I think that's an important aspect of this whole standard. In fact, auctusESG is working on a project to compare the Indian reporting standards with the IFRS, and we would take that to the regulator to look at how the Indian regulator needs to look at it from a global standard adoption perspective. So thank you very much, and that was extremely useful. I'm handing it back over to Rahul. Rahul, over to you to take the whole discussion forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Namita. Those were very thought-provoking and insightful remarks, and an absolute pleasure to hear. I'm sure these insights would be very valuable for the research paper that auctusESG is currently working on, titled Financing for Climate Transition Roadmap for Banks in Emerging Markets, in partnership with the climate think tank RMI. Basically, this report aims to provide a step-by-step guidance framework for banks in emerging markets to design and implement a climate transition plan to transition to their portfolios towards net zero. So we will now jump into our dynamic panel discussion. Namita, may I request you to moderate our discussion for the day? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rahul. And we've had some very solid recommendations. It would be important to now socialize these amongst bankers. And we have experts here with us today. Rahul introduced them earlier. The panel discussion's objective is to focus on how the banking sector in emerging markets is responding to transitioning. And I'm seeing in the chat box, questions have already started coming in. I think transitioning to a low carbon future, building resiliency from the climate shocks, and exploring climate aligned finance at scale. I think that's what this is going to focus on. The findings from these deliberations will serve as a valuable input to the report that Rahul just mentioned about, which is going to focus on financing climate transition, kind of a roadmap, talking about the how to do, because we have a lot of what to do, but talking a lot of how to do. Welcome. We have Alhamdu, Christine, Marga, Ajit. Thank you very much for joining in. I'm going to have 2 rounds of questions for each of you. I would request you to take about 3 to 4 minutes to respond to each question. And I'm going to ask the first question and then circle back to you. So my first question is to Alhamdu. AFDB has set a very large climate finance target for low-income African countries. I think it's at about 25 billion by 2025. In continents like Africa, scalability plays a huge role. I mean, we always struggle with the pipeline, right? Which is less risky. So how is AFDB working on that, especially with the local financial institutions or domestic financial institutions, to be able to align with the climate considerations and looking at scale of the climate aligned finance at the same time? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Namita. Thanks for inviting the African Development Bank to this very insightful webinar. Let me start by some background. As you may already know, despite contributing minimally to global greenhouse gas emissions, Africa remains among the most vulnerable regions to climate impacts. And this is the region of the African Development Bank is operating in. Yet, the economic losses from climate change are already known. Currently, they are between 7 to 15 billion annually in Africa, and they are projected to grow to 50 billion annually by 2030. The climate transition for Africa is very critical, and it will require significant financial resources. We have estimated that this transition will require about $3 trillion by 2030. And when you compare that with the current financial flows across the continent, we are far behind the requirements. Currently, according to the latest Global Climate Finance Landscape Report, which suggests that the global climate finance for 2021-2022 was about 1.3 trillion. But Africa received around 30 billion, only 30 billion of it, which represents something like 2.3 or 2.5, which is less than 3%. So it's worrying. But despite this, we see that things are happening. There are many initiatives, and it is in that context that the African Development Bank has set some very ambitious targets on climate finance. And you mentioned the target of 25 billion by 2025. I must say that we are on good track on achieving this. We have also committed to allocating at least 40% of our annual investments as climate finance every year. This is another target. We have also committed to ensuring parity between our adaptation finance and our mitigation finance, according to the global requirements by the Paris Agreement. So the African Development Bank so far, to date, we have mobilized around 24 billion as climate finance, directed to various interventions. And we have, that was since the ratification of the Paris Agreement in 2016. And this financing is split 50-50 between adaptation and mitigation. We have also channeled $2.6 billion to the Africa's financial sector through line of credit, equity investments, support to trade financing, etc. And in terms of achieving our 40% target of climate finance, I must report that we have exceeded the target in 2021, when we achieved 41%, and followed by 45% in 2022. And last year, 2023, we have far exceeded the target by allocating 55% of our annual investment as climate finance. This also shows a positive signal that the bank's operations are progressively becoming climate smart, and that they are contributing significantly to addressing the climate financing gap that the continent is facing. So in terms of achieving this 25 billion, as I said, we are on good track. Progress to date shows that we stand at 14 billion. So 56% of this commitment is already achieved at midterm, and we are hopeful that over the next 2 years, 2024 and 2025, we will be achieving the 25 billion target. So in this regard, we are also leveraging our AAA rated financial rating in order to leverage resources from the financial market in order to complement the 25 billion that we have already committed to. We are also working with global climate financing mechanisms, such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, the Climate Investment Funds, to co-finance projects together in order to mobilize additional climate financing for our interventions across the continent. For instance, with the Green Climate Fund, we are currently managing a portfolio of about $679 billion, which is financing from DCF to our own investments. As you know, Africa's major problem is adaptation. Adaptation finance is one significantly lagging behind. And to address the challenge, we have partnered with the Global Center on Adaptation, GCA, in order to develop a program called Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a 25 billion program to scale up adaptation action across Africa. And we are also making significant progress towards this implementing this program. We have set up also with the UK government a risk transfer facility called Room to Run Guarantee, a sovereign guarantee, which is currently helping to de-risk investment and create headroom for greater investment in climate action into African countries. You mentioned least income countries. This is most of them are in Africa. And for that, last year we adopted a new initiative called Climate Action Window, which is aiming to mobilize 13 billion climate finance, largely adaptation finance for the 37 least income countries in Africa. So the program is already operational. We launched the first call of proposals for this program, focusing on adaptation at COP28 last year. And currently we are We have received more than 2,000 applications that we are reviewing, and we are hoping to allocate the resources we have recently mobilized from donors to implement those projects. So I think we are to conclude on this. The African Development Bank is playing its role. We are also very active in the green bonds markets. You know, we started from the early days of the market, starting in 2013, to establish a green bond framework through which we have been able to issue so far 16 green bonds and 11 social bonds with about 11 billion US dollars, which is currently being allocated to a wide range of projects across the continent, including Cabeluca Wind Farm project in Cape Verde, which is playing a critical role in providing green access to green electricity to the country. They were currently consolidating this green bond program into a sustainability bond program with the aim to scale up and to become a sustainability bond framework in the near future. We finally work also we provide also technical assistance to financial institutions, and as I speak, we are working with the Development Bank of Nigeria and the Association of African Development Finance Institutions to build their capacity to get accredited to the Green Climate Fund and have direct access to the funds of the GCF. And we, in terms of capacity building, also we provide policy support to countries through an initiative called the Africa NDC Hub. We are currently helping countries to revise and implement their NDCs and also develop their long-term strategies under the Paris Agreement. So there is a wide range of intervention and package that the bank has put together, from financing to policy and capacity building, in order to help African countries, achieve climate transition in a smarter and greener manner in the near future. I stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I think, the fact that you have been able to raise so much of capital just demonstrates the absorbent capacity of the African economy to, take in all that finance. And two particular things that you mentioned was the focus on adaptation, which is so much required, and innovation. I think that is something that I picked up in terms of, what you said. Let me move on to Asia now. And, I would pose my question to Christine. Christine, ADB again has taken a mammoth climate finance target of 100 billion by 2030. So how do you see the Asian economy absorbing this target, and what strategy is the bank applying to meet this target? So it would be really great to hear from you how it's involved with the domestic financial sector, commercial banks, to build their preparedness and to scale up the intake of this finance. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you so much, Namita, and thank you for inviting ADB to participate in this wonderful seminar today. So Asia and the Pacific, as you may know, originates more than half of the global carbon dioxide emissions, while also being really acutely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change in many of our countries, and specifically down in the Pacific as well, too. The region needs to invest an estimated $3 trillion per year in energy and transport assets alone to meet net zero by 2050. And that's around 50% more than the current levels. And again, that's just focused on energy and transport assets. In terms of ADB, we have done a very significant shift towards looking at climate solutions, because we also believe that, Asia can be the region where there's a lot of opportunities and ideas for really impacting climate change solutions. So we have taken a very strong shift in our strategy to support climate change, as you've noticed. It's part of our operational priority now from here for a number of years going forward. So in addition to a cumulative financing of 100 billion by 2030 for climate change, also 75% of the number of the projects that we sign will be supporting climate mitigation and/or adaptation as well, too. So just to give you a little bit more of a flavor in terms of how we're spreading it out and what's our overall strategy. First, in terms of climate mitigation, we're looking at about 66 billion that we want to reach. And of course, climate mitigation, looking at energy storage, energy efficiency, low carbon transport. Transformative adaptation projects is our second area. So we are looking at about 34 billion, specifically in climate sensitive sectors such as urban, agriculture, and water. We're really looking at designing them with a primary purpose of effective climate adaptation and enhanced resilience. Then third really is our second shift at ADB, and that shift is toward private sector operations. And that's a really important shift for us. And it twins, of course, very closely with climate change and being able to, for climate financing, absorb that financing as well too, in driving change that's very tangible towards climate solutions. So there we are looking at creating more commercially viable projects for both ADB and the private investors. So our expansion will be underpinned by improvements in operational efficiencies, a post-pandemic recovery, market demand for financing, new technology and innovations in climate financing, and then new areas of business for the private sector in terms of climate finance operations. And for the private sector, of that 100 billion, we're looking at about $12 billion to bring into the private sector, and then mobilizing or crowding in private sector investments of about an additional 18 billion. So co-financing, doing syndicated loans, all sorts of good things there in terms of mobilizing the private sector. Then in terms of supporting green, resilient, and inclusive recovery from COVID-19, looking at innovative financing platforms, and that means working throughout the region. We have really great, strong regional partnerships that we can leverage. We have platforms that we've set up, such as the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility and Green Recovery Platform. We're working to leverage funds from capital markets and private sector investors for low carbon infrastructure. And then last, but certainly not least, is really looking at working with the DMCs to see how we can help advance their reforms, right? To really unlock those actions that are needed for policy-based lending to support our financial institutions and multiple other sectors as well too, for climate resilience and climate mitigation. Now, just in terms of kind of what we're seeing in the market, from MDBs as well as other international development financial institutions in terms of helping the regions absorb that amount of capital versus, of course, working to create opportunities. We're still not seeing enough bankable projects. I know people talk about that a lot, but bankable projects in the area. We really need to also see that government policies are being reformed to support and create incentives for projects, and especially small scale projects as well too, so that we can have our banks go in and lend to them as well too. So channeling funding to the banks, but also then working on the policy side, on the real sector side, to really create those incentives for the banks to build those assets. Also, just in terms of course, we know about the progress, which is really great to see, of capital markets in terms of thematic bond issuances. So green, we're starting to see some great blue projects that are coming up as well too. So that's very exciting. And ADB, as well as the others, can come in as anchor investors if we're needed to crowd in private sector funding as well too. So those are some of the ways that we're looking at absorbing this capital, at least through an MDB and DFI perspective as well too. So I'll stop there and back over to you, Namita.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Christine. I think you've just set the segue for me to get in Marga. And, Marga, both Christine and Alhamdu both spoke about the green bond market. And we've seen that the green bond market globally is growing very fast. But when you look at emerging markets, it doesn't really resonate with that kind of global growth. So in this context, what do you think are the challenges, and what are the measures that the EU is taking, particularly to boost, intake or uptake in the emerging markets like Bangladesh? So over to you, Marga. Marga, you muted.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Good. Thank you very much, Namita. Very interesting contributions from all the speakers. So I'm based in Bangladesh, and as you say, indeed, globally, green bond markets are growing rapidly, and emerging markets like Bangladesh, because we can Bangladesh call an emerging country, have lower growth in this market than the developed countries. There are many challenges for emerging markets. For instance, to start with, the regulatory framework for the issuing of the bonds and other types of securities it has to become up to international standards, yeah? In order to attract foreign investors, you will have to have this international standard. Still a long way to go. for many countries, but I'm referring now to Bangladesh, but let's keep it general for at first instance. I will now refer here, because that's mainly our area that we are looking into, and sovereign bonds. They can be issued in country or outside the country, but I will assume here that they are mainly bought by foreign investors. Apart from the regulatory framework as a challenge, there are macroeconomic conditions, or if you wish, conditions to be favorable. For instance, you need a stable exchange rate. If not, the exchange rate risk may be too big. Another challenge is also to have a comprehensive and at the same time a precise taxonomy. Yeah. So you need to have, the country needs to have a taxonomy, not only for banks, because I see it here in Bangladesh, they have it for banks and financial institutions. Maybe there is also another type of taxonomy for other issuers, but I have not seen it yet. But we are not only talk about banks and financial institutions or other institutions, organizations, but for the government, in case the government would issue bonds. Yeah, you need to have that taxonomy. Then on green bonds, there are various advantages, such as it can, of course, provide additional sources of financing for investors, diversifying the investor base by attracting those interested in environmental, social, and governance considerations, and securing new sources of climate finance. Moreover, green bonds will offer for the government long-term financing. That's the idea, in particular for climate resilient infrastructure or other long-term projects that are green, helping the mitigation or adaptation concerning climate, and they can potentially reduce the cost of debt finance. Bangladesh, so the country where I work, it is a good example here. In fact, debt to GDP, public debt to GDP ratios are still low, so there is room for taking on additional concessional financing. And on the other hand, the ambitions regarding investments in green projects are huge. So I've been in several meetings here, and of course other people can correct me, but I have heard here regularly that calculations show that Bangladesh until the year 2030 would need an additional $26 billion every year to meet the needs that it has in the plans that it foresees itself. Yeah. So that is an enormous amount, and that can certainly not all of a sudden be found. So the capital markets, and in particular green bonds, can help here greatly, I think. Then on the EU, so European Union, so we are based here, we have an office, but of course we have our headquarters that's also very active, and there is an initiative being developed which is called Global Green Bond Initiative. It is still being prepared, so it's not yet finalized, but it's an initiative, the GGBI, so Global Green Bond Initiative. This is together with the European Investment Bank. The conditions for that are being established, and there will be support from other financial institutions. The idea would be to help governments such as Bangladesh to issue green bonds that are very concessional. Yeah. And the way this works is that, well, first of all, we have to be clear about the definition of a green bond. Yeah. Globally, there are lots of you cannot call every bond a green bond, but we as EU, our definition is that a green bond is a type of fixed income instrument that is specifically earmarked to raise money for climate and environmental projects. These bonds are typically asset linked and backed by the issuing entity's balance sheet, so they usually carry the same credit rate as their issuers' other debt obligations. So we are still, it's all still very preliminary stages, but the discussions are here very lively. And of course, we are still seeking a way also to cooperate with the right person, because there are other implementing partners and development partners that are active in this field, as we just also heard from ADB, for instance. but we have to cooperate very well together to work with the government on these green bonds. Thank you. I'll stop here. Thank you, Namita.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marga, and thanks a lot for putting out, the challenges, especially because, when commercial entities look at these challenges, that serves as a big deterrent for entering, instruments or entering into markets to issue instruments like this. And I want to bring in a commercial banker angle here, and I want to ask Ajit the next question. Ajit, my question to you is, when we look at India, mid-size Indian banks are proving to be more agile when it comes to both risks as well as the opportunities, and we've seen how Federal Bank has performed in those areas. So why don't you share with the larger audience in terms of what were the triggers for Federal Bank to embark upon this whole climate risk and transition management journey, how that has been useful for you to also raise capital? So, what are some of the insights that can be replicated for other, financial institutions in the emerging markets? Over to you, Ajit.
Thank you, Namita. First of all, I'm again thanking auctusESG, ADFIAP, and ADFIM for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful webinar. So coming to the triggers, a few decades back, our main discussion or debate was whether climate change was real or not, whether it is near or far. Then again, the discussions and debates went on like, when should we act and who should act? Whether the one who have already contributed to these emissions because of which the change is happening, or the one who are all now doing that. So debates are going on, but at this juncture, one point is clear: climate change is real. The things we heard of happening elsewhere in the world, or which was supposed to happen 50, 60 years hence, now it is happening before our eyes. So we have seen a lot of global catastrophic events which has come as a part of or because of the climate change. And coming to India, we have seen the flash floods in Mumbai in 2005, the 2015 floods in Chennai. A lot of things were because of climate change. And this climate change is basically because of the artificial or the human intervention. And the COVID pandemic period, wherein we were all kept inside our home, proved that we are the major cause, the humans, because we could see clear skies, clear air, clear water, clear environment, and lower emissions. And coming to Federal Bank, though all these were happening globally and even out across the country in India, year 2018, when the Kerala floods, which was a one of kind in 100 years, that was what that made us critically evaluate the impact of climate change in our business, opportunities, and climate and continuity. A vast majority of our clients, operations, staff, and their family at large, and public at large in Kerala was impacted due to this flood. And this made us think how to build resilience over many things as individuals, as a society, and as a financial institution. The subsequent floods in 2019 also reinforced the same. This even changed the way we look at our premise selection, insurance coverage requirement, collateral valuation, etc. And towards the end of 2019, we made a presentation on ESG to our top management, where we have stated the things that can, or the catastrophes that can happen to the world as such, and also to the financial institutions due to this climate change. And this was really a starting point. And we also started the ESG theme of the month to popularize amongst ourselves. And we also had a cross-functional team in the organization for this. And during the same time, various agencies are started rating. ESG rating was also there. And that was majorly based on publicly available documents, and it was unsolicited ratings. And this also was one of the triggers which made us think what we are doing wrong, or what we should do, and what others are doing. And we start delving into such scores more, and we decided to mainframe ESG into our business by forming an ESG division within the bank. And in July 21, actually, after the infusion of the first green equities in South Asia by IFC, it made us shift our gears through the implementation of a full-fledged ESMS process in our lending operations. And we decided even to phase out coal by 2030, and decided that we'll no longer do fresh funding for thermal power projects and oil and gas exploration activities. And we also adopted IFC's performance standards to evaluate the E&S risk associated with the lending. But on the other side, there's also opportunity wherein we also committed to build 130 billion of green loans by 25 December. All these things we started doing with passion. And when you do something of good quality or something which is good along with our passion, it's equally important to tell the success stories to the external world. So we started disclosing our ESG initiatives in the annual report from the financial year 2021. Meanwhile, BRSR, the SEBI also came with BRSR replacing BRR, and it was initially voluntary in FY22. We did that voluntarily in FY22, and in FY23 it was mandatory for the first 1,000 companies, and there we did it. Along with that, we also we did it in accordance with GRI also, a step ahead of that. And coming to the challenges, actually, the main challenge is lack of clear taxonomy or lack of uniformity in definitions, awareness levels across organizations, and a very, very long term for the results to be clearly understood. And as a financial institution, no work in this domain is sufficient until we look at our credit portfolio and make them future ready. There comes the challenges related to data availability, consumer customer cooperation, and customer awareness on climate risk and its impacts, market practices, where there are many banks approaching the same customer. And when we ask for the data, they won't be able to ready. And because they'll be taking the terms which are most comfortable or favorable with them. And another change is how to integrate this in our normal business plan. Because whenever we are discussing about business plan, it is for a 3 to 5 year horizon. Even in your ICAP, when we are thinking of capital planning, it is for 3 to 5 years or more. But when we are speaking about climate risk or sustainability, it is for 30 to 50 years. And none of the existing models with the internal rating, capital adequacy, credit underwriting, business strategy, etc., cover such a long time horizon. And to commit something like no coal exposure, we still know that the country is heavily dependent on coal, at least for 1-2 decades. But it was not an easy task, the decision that was taken by us. But we had taken this because we wanted to be the most admired bank and go on sustainability. So based on our learning, what we think is like, as we say, even a big waterfall starts from a small spring. There should be a starting point. And it is always good to start small, take baby steps, get your tone at the top ready. That's most important. And get your policy approved by the board and have internal committees and internal commitments to start with. And monitoring these commitments will help driving action and taking the same to the next level.
Thanks, Ajit. Remarkable work. I think, one observation that I have been in the banking sector, many institutions, embark upon this journey for the need to raise capital. So there's business reason or rationale at the core when you look at, imbibing these kind of aspects. But great to know that Federal Bank had a human angle at the core to, the trigger. Especially, I think that is very important. And, the overall approach, which is more, not just top down, but it's also bottom up. So, you putting it up as a need to the board and the board agreeing. I think that's the consolidated approach that we need to see more institutions imbibe. Thanks for that. And I'm going to come back to you. I'm keeping a very sharp eye on the watch. And we have about 20 minutes to go. So I would request each of the panelists to take about 2 minutes to answer the next questions that I'm going to come to you with, because I want to also go to the audience questions. So let me go to Alhamdu. Tell me, climate transition includes borrowers aligning with low transition strategies, say to reduce financed emissions. I mean, that is something that we are talking a lot. And, in most developing countries, we see a large portion of MSME borrowers who lack really the wherewithal to access conventional finance. And, therefore, how can they get onto this track of decarbonization? So what is the role that DFIs like AFDB playing to influence climate transition and bringing into the fold this MSME borrower sector? So over to you, Alhamdu. Sorry, are you there? Oh, I don't know. Okay, let me move on. Maybe he's just dropped off. Christine, let me go to you. We brought out the regulatory perspective, and there are also questions in terms of, what are the kind of regulations that are out there. So, Asian market regulators are, looking at very sharply, the entire regulation in terms of climate. And how do you see this alignment with banks to become climate smart across all functions? Because at one level, bringing out regulations is there, but implementation and adapting to these require a lot more for financial institutions to do in a holistic manner. So what are your views on it, please?
Thanks so much, Namita. That's a great question. So, it varies across different countries in terms of what are the incentives that are out there for the banks to respond to some of these regulatory changes. We have seen just a few statistics for you, just in terms of kind of looking at some of the domestic climate finance, but mostly from national DFIs. We have seen, for instance, and this is dated 2018 to 2019, you saw up to 80% of total flows allocated and spent within each country during that period. So that was an increase, actually. And most climate finance was raised in the form of debt finance instruments. It's about 70% of total financing. Most of them are at a project level or through large corporations. And this kind of goes to your question, actually, to African Development Bank about MSMEs in terms of responding there. So I think that those banks are responding to some of these regulations in terms of working with their existing clients on project finance and working and making sure they're green. But in terms of actually greening it across all their businesses, it's very difficult, especially on the MSME side, as you say, as well, too. And a lot of capacity building needs to be done, and that's where the DFIs can help come in as well, too. And again, back to my earlier point, where incentives need to be brought in from the governments in terms of the regulations as well, too. So it's really kind of mixed. And then just in terms of the regulations overall, well, most countries have implemented their own regulation. Ernst & Young reports that progress and success of the policies differ greatly within the region. So India, the People's Republic of China, and the Philippines around mid-30s, and Indonesia 22 is cited as needing marked improvement, while other markets in the region covering the study fare better in terms of quality disclosure. And for instance, with Malaysia, 43%, and Singapore, 41%. So the regulations themselves are kind of varied and need to be strengthened as well, too. I think that still in the banks, in terms of the regulations and really moving forward in terms of doing greening, there still needs to be a lot of kind of understanding about, which projects qualify as green, how can they make them green, and importantly, what's the green risk or climate risk within their portfolio as well, too. I don't see so much of an assessment of their own portfolio in terms of looking at the risks there and how they can be vulnerable to it going forward, and some of the risks that were talked earlier about by IFRS as well, too, in terms of pricing adjustments, stranded assets, things like that. That's why I see a little bit less movement there. But in terms of actually starting to green some of the main business lines, I see that happening, but mostly kind of on the project and research side, and it's much more difficult in terms of MSMEs. But you do see now some green housing finance as well, too. So it's really a variety of different types of, I think, trends going forward. There's definitely more awareness raising, but certainly there's a lot more that we need to do to work with them.
Yeah. Thanks. In fact, you answered one of the audience questions also in terms of, how do you define green or sustainable? Because there is, multiple definitions are out there. And if you're working in, the interoperability between markets, I think that is the key to look at. So thanks a lot. I'm told that there's a technical glitch for Alhamdu and he's trying to join in back. But let me go to Marga while we wait for him to join. Marga, I'm coming to specifically your comments on green bonds. And, if you look at the sovereign green bonds issued by countries, across Asia or, across many emerging markets, these initially saw, so for example, India, it initially saw a very good response, a price advantage. However, these issues seem to be tapering and not aligned to the required green capital of those countries. So what will it take for more countries within emerging markets to accelerate issuances as, financing the NDCs is a priority for most of the countries? So what is your response to that? Marga?
Thank you very much, Namita. I think, well, if you would compare India with Bangladesh, the capital market, the green bond market, Bangladesh is much more it's still starting. I think there were 2 issues of green bonds, but very small. I think what is needed is something that catalyzes it. Yeah, so I think they have to take a big hurdle before they have the trust of foreign investors to come in country, big international institutional investors, and also, of course, domestically and other types of international investors, that they have to become interested in buying bonds from Bangladesh. I think Bangladesh as such has very good perspective. It has a high economic growth, but it is on a good growth path, let me say this way. But other macroeconomic conditions are at this stage complicated to make it attractive for foreign investors to come to Bangladesh. But as I mentioned before, so the EU has this global green bond initiative that is still to have to start, yeah, but that could catalyze. I think we could help them in catalyzing the interest in green bonds, in this case, the interest in the European green bonds, but it may also help for others that want to issue bonds, because this initiative from EU, it's very concessional, I would say. A share of this of the issuance would be taken by a consortium, by the European Investment Bank and others, let's say. And the other share is then for the one that buys the bonds. And also in risk perspective, so if the government would default and not be able to pay back the bond, then also there is a safety net, let's say. So I think this EU initiative is very viable. But it's still, as I said, still a lot is to be done on the regulatory framework, and also macroeconomic conditions maybe have to improve a bit more stability on exchange rate, other factors. But I think, yeah, and I think that other emerging markets, because you asked for the other emerging markets, I think they may have a similar kind of problem. Yeah. Thank you very much, Namita.
Thank you, Marga. And I want to ask Ajit a specific question on, Ajit, when we look at transition, especially when it comes to scope 3 and, the availability of data, assessment methodologies, all this is evolving or lacking in some way. And, you have been talking about climate transition in that sense from a risk as well as opportunity perspective. So how do you see the banking sector moving forward, adapting to disclosure regulations on climate risk without lack of these kind of things? And, especially within India, because of the release of the recent regulation on climate risk disclosures. So what are your views, Ajit? Over to you.
Yes, Namita. So before coming to the Indian regulations, I think we must have seen on March 6th, SEC has come up with the new adopted guidelines on the same. So there actually, if you see, the rules are from the originally proposed one with March 22. It have regarding scope 3 emissions, the final rules no longer include the scope 3 emission disclosures, and also requirement to disclose scope 1 and scope 2 GHG emissions is limited by materiality standard. And this is happening in a world or a place where they are much ahead of us in case of data. But when we come to the disclosure requirements that has come up as per the new standards that is released by RBI, so it is going to be very challenging for all banks in India. And that too, first of all, thanks to SEBI for coming up with the BRSR, but thing is that BRSR is mandatory only for the first 1,000 listed companies. And the vast majority of listed entities and the entire unlisted entities need not disclose their emissions anywhere. And in addition, actually, the entire retail and agriculture sector is not even thinking about that. So in this context, the RBI is asking us, all banks, to disclose their financed emissions and bifurcating them by both sectors and borrower scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So this is not going to be easy at all. So that is a major thing. And in that case, actually, we need to use or have the proxy data, such as the financial data suggested by PCAF. But again, this will result in lower data quality score. And even more important is that even we will not be able to meet the RBI requirement of disclosing emission breakup by scope 1, 2, and 3. But there is no other option than going with the proxy data. And in my view, what I feel is like the smaller firms, if they want to start computing their emissions, their own, there should be some nodal agencies or some quasi-regulatory bodies who can create centralized database where firms can report these numbers if available. And based on the sector, geography, and other parameters, smaller firms should be able to generate their emissions based on production data and also link their value chain through some like say GST number and HSN code and some such unique numbers, so that data we can take that the data that is generated so that can be taken by the banks for reporting these things. And this will also help reducing the data gaps and model risk at a systemic level. And India has shown the way of leveraging the power of technology, as in the case of UPI and other based approvals in many fields. So something similar should be here, which is system enabled. And without the manufacturing sector being mandated to report their emissions in some form or other fashion, and that being made available to banks online, this will be again a challenge, and the real benefits would be limited. And other thing is that banks also now should need to ask more questions to the clients. Maybe we should start capturing the details of production, location of the factories. We should have some geographical information system where we need to capture all these things, so that this will again become more meaningful. And even if banks find some sectors are high in emissions, say mortgage in the year of construction, and say some other sectors within MSME agri, bank may not be able to reduce the credit flow to these sections or sectors due to multiple other factors. So, and other thing, government also should have some transition plans for both industry-wise and sector-wise, so that in turn these sectors or industries or the institutions can frame their own transition plan, because disclosure alone would not suffice everything. There should be a transition plan that is announced by the government that is applicable to each sector and industry, based on which they can plan their own strategy, and the data which is again made available through that will be more meaningful. So basically, these are the challenges which I feel coming to scope 3 emissions.
Yeah, no, very, very rightly said. And, a centralized agency giving this data out would be extremely useful. And I was quite surprised at one of the G20 meetings, the Indian Science and Research Organization was throwing up data, and when I looked at the data, it was all that could feed into physical risk management. So I think we need to also go look for agencies who may be sitting on pockets of such data. But thank you very much. I'm going to take the questions very quickly from the audiences, and I would request each of the panelists to quickly answer these. I'm going to just look at the relevance. So maybe I could go to Christine. Christine, there's a question here which is targeting MSMEs involved in the wash sector, and they're much smaller in size. So how do you think they could be brought onto the track of ESG, especially considering the lack of information at this stage for the businesses? So, Christine, over to you for just 2 minutes, or less than 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, in general, as I was mentioning, it's difficult for MSMEs to be greening and bluing themselves, and just because they are pretty much focused on daily survival, right? So it's in terms of bringing in incentives to them, and educating them as well too, and then sometimes linking them up through the value chain as well in terms of helping them green. And then some of the banks, sometimes the banks have done. We've seen this in Georgia, for instance, and we supported an SME academy up there over a number of years jointly with them, and that helped to educate the MSMEs on basic kind of business skills to help them become bankable. But you could take that type of model and then help green them as well too, and really hold their hand along the way as well. So it's a variety, I think, of different. It's very intensive. What I'm saying is also somewhat costly. So it really takes a commitment and a plan to educate, to incentivize MSMEs, and then look through the value chain in terms of how you can work with them to try to green them as well too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ajit, there's a question for you here. Does banks view competition law or market monopoly as a roadblock to transition? And, can industry players expect some kind of leniency on enforcement of competition laws in pursuit of transition?
Can you repeat?
So basically, market monopoly as a hindrance to transition.
Yeah, of course, it will be a hindrance to transition because all are not like again the lack of clear taxonomy and as I already mentioned, that is there in the force. So monopoly will be a hindrance for this, and we need to see, because being like in our case itself, we are having a lower share of business compared to the other bigger banks. We have a less than 2 share holder in the market as well as a whole. So this is actually going to be, and as acting as a hindrance even now. So that is clear from that.
Great. Thank you. And, we are seeing that also with the carbon border adjustment mechanism that has been brought out by the EU, where many other countries are actually challenging, including India, in terms of the, trade barrier that will get created for those exports in 7 sectors that they have identified for those exporters. And, it's becoming more of a WTO issue rather than a climate or a sustainability challenge, really. So thanks for that. And Marga, as this whole space is evolving, the green bond market is evolving, it would be interesting to know what the EU is particularly doing to help small issuers in this any such measures in Bangladesh that you're taking for small issuers?
At this stage, we are only starting, I have to admit. So, but we will, with other development partners that may be even a bit further in this field, we will try to also with technical assistance and we have actually with the GGBI, there will be also a lot of technical assistance available for helping the institutions to do what is required. Yeah, whether that is the Securities and Exchange Commission or Finance Division or Central Bank. We have these. We will have these. Sources of financing, but of course, there is a need to attract the small issuers. Yeah, sure.
Great. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot. Marga, Ajit, and Christine and Alhamdu had some technical glitch; he couldn't join back. But I think this was a very, very interesting and thought-provoking session. Your inputs were absolutely valuable in terms of, financial institutions to start thinking about the capital that is available there. I mean, both ADB and AFDB spoke about humongous amount of capital that is being made available for the transition journey. Marga put out the EU stance on how, as a delegation, they are looking at, providing that technical assistance support or the input support to technology upgradation, so on and so forth. An angle from a commercial bank as to how they started their journey and how they have, despite no level playing field, if I may say that, how they are moving forward in the Indian market with a very solid balance sheet. And how they're looking at mainstreaming climate aspects. So this was absolutely interesting. And thank you very much for being with us. This is going to feed into the report that auctusESG with RMI is going to do. And we will keep you posted on that. With that, I will hand over to my colleague Rahul to end the session. Over to you, Rahul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Namita. We are approaching the end of the webinar, and we would like to extend our sincere thanks to all the speakers and panelists for their time and insights on the key aspects of climate transition. I hope you enjoyed the session as much as we enjoyed hosting it. The conversations have been riveting and provided us with a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much for joining us from across geographies. And the recording of the session will be available on the auctusESG website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.